Hello, and welcome to video number 8 in the America 2 video series. My name is John Shar, and I will once again be your host for this video, where the topic will again be one of the most serious problems facing America today: discriminatory law making. That being the enactment of laws expressly designed to favor some groups of Americans over other groups of Americans. At its beginning, the founders of America set out to create a government whose primary objectives were to create a place on earth where life, liberty, justice, and an honest ability to pursue personal happiness were guaranteed to every citizen as each citizen's fundamental rights. Our Constitution was formed to protect and defend these rights at whatever the cost. No government formed before or since has ever attempted to do that. America is unique in these regards. The preamble to our Constitution reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." The founders thought that being a just society was imperative if all the other rights stated in the Constitution would even have a chance of being achieved. And they were right. Towards those ends, they established a system of justice with courts of law to assure that equal justice was available to every citizen as part of their fundamental rights. And over the centuries, since America was founded as a sovereign nation, our most prominent leaders from law schools, the legislators that make the laws, the attorneys, jurists, and judges who work within the justice system remind us frequently that America is a nation of laws, and that we follow the rule of law at all times. The generally accepted definition of the rule of law is a principle under which all persons, institutions, and entities are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated. Aristotle and Plato are credited with first defining what constituted the rule of law in their works, Politics, from Aristotle, and Laws, Plato. Over the years, attempts have been made to state the rule of law differently in mostly minor ways. Most more expansive definitions have centered on elaborating more, and sometimes expanding the definitions of public promulgation, equal enforcement, and independent adjudication. But in every definition, care has been taken to state specifically that the laws must be written so as to be equal for all, and enforcement of the laws in tribunals of justice must also be equal for all. The United Nations has lately gotten involved in trying to define what the rule of law means or what they believe it should mean. They added the requirement that laws must be consistent with international human rights principles. But nobody knew what those principles were and couldn't agree on what they were. So the United Nations published their international human rights principles as they were defined in their Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. These rights are those human rights that cannot be abrogated by any government, even in times of crisis. The UN argues that such rights can constitute the core elements of substantive justice principle in their definition of the rule of law. They added the word substantive because they could not get people to agree on what the international human rights principles are. Equal treatment for all the laws has been a cornerstone of American democracy since even before day one. And that brings us to the question for today, which is, why in America, where we pride ourselves on equal treatment for all under the laws, being a nation of laws, and claim to always follow the rule of law in our institutions, do legislators and administrators pride themselves upon their ability to enact and enforce laws that treat some citizens differently from other citizens as a matter of course, and, in fact, require that the laws they write discriminate in favor of some and at the expense of others almost 100% of the time. This dichotomy, doing the opposite of stated intentions, is nothing new in America, but it has become epidemic in its proportions over the past few decades. In the best of the worst cases, just the flawed execution of a good law is contrary to the stated intention of the law. In these instances, it is a failure of the justice system to dispense justice in a fair and equal measure to everyone. But in the worst of the worst cases, the law itself is intentionally designed by the legislative branch to treat some citizens differently, better, from other systems. In a majority of these instances, accommodations are made to moneyed individuals or groups, or to a political party, and the law is purposely designed to favor some over others. When this happens, injustice becomes the accepted way of following the rule of law, and society becomes ever more divided. The worst part is that the courts, originally established for the sole purpose of being the great levelers, ensuring equal justice for all, rule in favor of the discriminating law makers. And equal justice for all is officially then replaced with justice for all those who can afford it. And when we reach that point, we no longer actually have a three-tiered system of government. Instead, we have a one-tiered system of government and are right back where we started in 1776. In either the best of the worst or the worst of the worst cases, equality under the laws goes out the window, and discrimination under the laws comes in the front door, and America becomes just another country who talks the talk but can't walk the walk. The split screen should now be displaying a short, scrolling list of some of the most well-known laws that were, at the time they were enacted and always thereafter, intended to not treat all citizens equally. These laws have been sold to us by our politicians in government as fair and equal, but in fact are neither fair and or equal at all. The legislators get away with doing these things, like enacting discriminatory laws, by promoting them as being compassionate and helping those who cannot help themselves. And they try, and often succeed, when doing this, because they know that, unlike them, most Americans root for the underdog. Root for the underdog most of the time. If the lawmakers were really as smart as they want us to think they are, all of these needs could be met in both equal for all and honest ways. But sadly, the majority of our lawmakers over the past 100 years have not been smart enough or honest enough to accomplish both of these things at the same time. I know I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but I'm going to say it anyway. The key to achieving both fair and equal laws and programs is to build an economy so strong and so robust that all of these programs could be handled by simple payments from the Treasury when due, because the economy would have added enough money to the Treasury to handle them all, but without the need for subterfuge, dishonesty, and discrimination. Putting everybody to work at meaningful, paying jobs would add enough money at present tax rates, maybe even below today's tax rates, to the Treasury, so that assuming everyone paid in the same percent of their increased earnings to help cover the nation's bills, it would cause our Treasury to have more than enough money to do everything that's needed without borrowing, without discriminating between classes, and without inflating the money supply more than just enough to cover new entrants to the workplace every year, and without making up high altruistic sounding names for government-managed programs to cover up the fact that the politicians aren't smart enough to think up ways to grow the economy other than borrowing and inflating the money supply and destroying the nation's economy overall. Of course, we would have to limit annual growth in the new entrants from other countries to meet the number of good jobs available to handle them. And someone would have to police the politicians to keep them from putting more fast ones by us and to keep the system honest. Keeping the system honest will require more than just periodic elections to remove incompetent and or dishonest politicians in government so as to greatly limit the kinds of damages we've been letting them get away with for the past 100 years' time. Edwin Burke, a famous jurist in England, once said, "All that's needed for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing." Now, might some of us get our hair mussed in fighting this battle for freedom and liberty and equal treatment under the laws? Probably. But you have to ask yourself, which is the greater evil? Doing nothing and watching your country circle the drain and finally disappear? Or getting your hair, maybe your nose, mussed a bit for a good cause? For at least the past 60 years' time, there have been no laws passed at the federal level that were not expressly designed to favor some Americans at the expense of other Americans, and or to treat some citizens differently or better than other citizens. Now, enactment of some, perhaps even many, discriminatory laws has possibly been well-intended. This is not always the case, of course. There have been numerous, hundreds of, possibly thousands of discriminatory laws passed whose intent was not honorable. In the worst instances, discriminatory laws are passed for no nobler purpose than to pay off a political debt or to help a personal friend or business campaign contributor of an elected official skim off some taxpayer money from the public trough. The most egregious examples are seldom, if ever exposed, due to the way legislation makes its way through the Congress. A bill of national importance, actually any bill, important or not, is allowed to have unlimited numbers of amendments attached to it that have no relationship whatsoever to the matter addressed in the main bill. These types of unrelated amendments, designed primarily to enrich personal friends and contributors to individual Congress members' political campaigns, have earned the label of pork barrel spending. The idea here is to compare the process to swine feeding at the public trough. The bad news is that as discriminatory and as bad as the pork barrel amendments are, they're just an extension of a pattern in lawmaking in general that has become predominant over the past 7 decades. Not just the unrelated amendments to important bills affecting most Americans are discriminatory. The main bills themselves are also discriminatory in nature. And sadly, this has not been done in ignorance on the part of the members of Congress, but has been done on purpose. By illustrating laws that were designed to be purposely discriminatory when they were enacted, I'm going to list here just a very few of the best known. The list could be several pages and probably even several volumes long, and I again apologize in advance if I left off one of your favorites. The list is just for purposes of illustration, and I'm purposely limiting it to a few examples just about all middle-class citizens, in fact, every citizen, are familiar with. The income tax, designed to favor the poor and the wealthy at the expense of the middle class. The Social Security Act, including Medicare and Medicaid, designed to benefit the elderly and or disabled at the expense of the young and able. Affirmative action, designed to benefit women and minorities at the expense of non-minorities and men. NAFTA and GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, designed to benefit management and stockholders of multinational companies at the expense of production workers worldwide. The Land Bank Act and many other subsidy farm programs designed to benefit food-producing businesses at the expense of food consumers. The GI Bill, designed to benefit those who spent time in a military service branch over those who did not spend time in a military service branch, regardless of whether the nation was at war or not during the enlistment period, and regardless of exclusions mandated by health, age, sex, physical disabilities, mental disabilities, and so on. The Marshall Plan, designed to help citizens and governments of foreign countries at the expense of citizens here in the United States, and a whole slew of welfare and or entitlement programs designed to benefit some more disadvantaged group of Americans, both individuals and businesses, at the expense of some supposedly less disadvantaged groups of Americans, mostly the middle-class taxpayers. The United States has a long history of enacting laws to provide advantages to some at the expense of others. The Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution prior to enactment of the Bill of Rights favored men and property owners over women and non-property owners and allowed for the keeping of slaves. It is worth noting that the U.S. Constitution was considered unenforceable until the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, were added. Those whose individual rights were not protected and or who believed themselves unrepresented and totally excluded from the decision-making process outlined in the main body of the Constitution prior to enactment of the Bill of Rights simply disregarded it as the law of the land. Only after those excluded at the outset were included by adding the Bill of Rights did the U.S. Constitution become the accepted law of the land by the citizens. And no one political party has a lock on this type of behavior or lawmaking. Both the present major political parties have been equally guilty of this type of behavior over the past 70 years' time, at least. Discriminatory lawmaking is a hard habit to break. Once Congress enacts one law that favors one group of Americans over other groups of Americans, it's somewhat difficult to rationalize not doing it a second time when a second group asks for special treatment. The more times Congress acts to favor one group over another, the more difficult it becomes to refuse any single interest group's request until, at last, a point in time is reached that becomes the only kind of laws that are enacted. Well, fellow citizens, welcome to that point in time. We are there. A philosophical question arises here about what the purpose of government is. Is the purpose of government, to provide equal opportunity and government protection to all citizens? Or is the purpose of government to provide for assuring some level of outcome for only some of the citizens? When the United States started out, the underlying premises was that the main purpose of government was to provide equality of opportunity and to protect individual citizens from encroachment upon their freedoms from either their own government or foreign powers. And that remained the underlying premise for nearly 150 years after the U.S. came into being as a sovereign nation. Over the past several decades, attempts have been made to modify that premise by including a tenet that government should also act to effect a prescribed level of outcome for some citizens, especially those seen to be disadvantaged in some way. In purely mathematical terms, these are mutually exclusive domains and or subsets. That is, both cannot exist at the same time and in the same space. It is not possible to have as a basic premise underlying government the equality of opportunity for all citizens, while at the same time consciously acting to reduce the opportunity for some and increasing it for others, with the government being put in a position of choosing winners and losers. The attempted modification in the premise underlying government actions attempting to guarantee equality of opportunity for only some, while concurrently guaranteeing outcome for only some and guaranteeing nothing at all for all of the rest, has been accomplished in the main through the process of passing laws that discriminate in favor of one or more groups of Americans at the expense of other groups of Americans. Discriminatory lawmaking is the divisive agent of separatism in general. Discriminatory lawmaking, especially over the past half to 3/4 of a century, has created divisions among Americans based upon wealth levels, age, sex, religion, race, political philosophy, and ethnic background, and others. And the end result of this has been to encourage Americans to think of themselves first as part of some hyphenated group like senior Americans, Hispanic Americans, African Americans, retired Americans, Jewish Americans, Catholic Americans, Irish Americans, Italian Americans, disabled Americans, liberal Americans, conservative Americans, and so on. And only second as Americans. During our Civil War between the North and South in America, when the question of slavery was hanging in the balance, the president reminded us that a house divided against itself cannot long stand. That was true then. It's still true today. Ongoing, purposeful discrimination in lawmaking is rendering America a house divided against itself. And that is definitely a problem. And that wraps it up for this video session. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And thanks for caring about our country. Wanting to make it, America, and us, all that we can be together. Be well. Be well.